Content warning, this is a film about living with disability. Thoughts of suicide and self-harm will be discussed. Hello, my name's Bobbie, and I want to talk about living with severe dyslexia. I've had severe dyslexia for my entire life, and you do sometimes see people talking about dyslexia, but it's not usually as severe as mine. I'm 38 years old and I can't read and write properly, which is to say, if you send me a text message, even if it's only 1 or 2 sentences, there's probably a 1 in 4 chance I'll actually be able to read it. Because of that, I don't check my text messages very often. In fact, I can't text. And that's often very difficult for people to understand. I tried to make friends with somebody once and we were supposed to meet up. I remember making an arrangement that we're going to meet at 6 o'clock. We're definitely going to meet at 6. Unless we speak on the phone, we're definitely going to meet at 6 o'clock. So I turned up at the train station to meet this person at 6 o'clock and waited for an hour and they never turned up, which was a little frustrating. Then later that day I got another friend to look through my text messages and I saw one saying, "Are you still on for meeting tonight? I thought we could meet at 5. I just had to give up on that friendship. And maybe that sounds unreasonable, like I was the one being unfair, but I had already explained to this person several times that I can't read and write properly and you can't send me text messages. I'm gonna go back to when I was a child at school, when I first got diagnosed with dyslexia. I was falling behind as a young child in primary school. I wasn't reading and writing as well as the other children. I wasn't learning my alphabet, learning my letters, learning my words. I could speak very fluently, which I think was one of the things that led me to being diagnosed very early as severely dyslexic, or well, at the time as dyslexic. I think one of my early teachers thought that I just didn't try. I remember hearing it, "She doesn't try, she just doesn't try." I knew I was trying. As time went on, they started to realise that there was a problem with me learning to read and write. And by the time I was 9, I'd spent several months being assessed. I enjoyed doing the test because they don't just test the things you're bad at, they compare them to the things you're good at. And I was told I had a very good vocabulary. My spoken skills were very good and that made me very happy. And then I remember being told that I was dyslexic. I remember being very, very happy to be told I had severe dyslexia. Sorry, dyslexia. It wasn't... I've only started calling it severe in later years because I wasn't able to overcome it the way other dyslexics seem to. I know there are other people like me. I know there are fully grown adults in their 30s, 40s, 50s who just can't read and write properly, can't sit down and open a book and read a page of a novel. But most of the people you see talking about it manage to read and write, not as well as the average person, but well enough to get by. They can read a book, but I can't. When I first got diagnosed as dyslexic, I'd already been struggling in school for a while, and I'd already been considered an oddity because I was very articulate as a child. I had a very broad vocabulary and I was very confident as well. I remember being a very confident child. I often wish I'd retained some of that confidence into adulthood. I'm not saying I don't appear confident as an adult, but that's probably to do with having acting training. As an adult, I'm not always as confident as I appear, but as a child I really was. And being told that I was dyslexic, I remember thinking now it'll be easy for me to explain to people what the problem is. I won't have to explain that I'm not stupid, but I can't read and write. I need extra help with that. I can't read that. I'm dyslexic.
Butterfly, in all your wanderings, have you seen others like me? Have you seen even one?
For a while I started calling myself a dyslexian. And it's kind of interesting and amusing to me to hear discussions among other people with disabilities talking about the difference between person first and disability first language. And for me to remember that, I went one further. I started calling myself a dyslexian. It just seemed to me like that must be the correct term. If you are dyslexic, if you have dyslexia, you must be a dyslexian. But it was only after I said that a few times to people and they didn't know what I meant, I had to go back to saying I have dyslexia, I'm dyslexic. And years later I still want to call myself a dyslexian because it sounds kind of like I come from planet dyslexic. Which, yeah.
Based on Klingon transmissions we've intercepted, the outlying Cardassian colonies were overrun almost immediately.
I often saw as a kid dyslexia portrayed a certain way in kids' media, as if you get the diagnosis and then you get a bit of extra help and then everything's fine. And also I often saw people be resistant to the diagnosis, being upset or shocked by it, saying, no, I'm not dumb, I'm not stupid. I don't have anything wrong with me. That's how you often see people react to being diagnosed with things on television, in films, in books. I mean, I'm sure there are people who are upset, horrified, uncomfortable with diagnosis that they get, whether it be something mental health, some kind of physical health issue, or a learning disability, but I wasn't, and I know a lot of other people aren't as well. I know a lot of other people are very happy and relieved when they get diagnosed. This is one reason I found myself quite recently crying with happiness when I read an account of somebody in a short story who was diagnosed with a learning disability and ended up crying with happiness, and I realised that was the first time I'd ever seen it depicted. It wasn't even in a published work, it was in a piece of fan fiction. I do see other people on YouTube talk about being dyslexic and how with a bit of extra help, a bit of extra coaching, they were eventually able to learn to get by. And good for them. 100%. I'm not debating, I'm not trying to contradict what they're saying, but I want people to know that it's not like that for all of us. For a lot of us, it's something that affects us for our entire lives. I'll give you an example. When I was 25, I had a job interview. I'd been unemployed for a long time, and it was to stack shelves in a supermarket. They gave me a literacy test during the interview, and afterwards I didn't get the job, and I was told it was because of my low level of literacy. Oh, they made it sure to make it clear they had another dyslexic person on staff, so it wasn't ableism or anything. But because of my low level of literacy, I might accidentally put all the beans on a shelf with tomatoes written on it. And of course it would have taken all of 2 seconds for a supervisor to check my work and to say, no, not there, there. Big companies, all companies are supposed to make reasonable accommodations for people with disabilities, but they don't. I do have GCSEs, By the time I was in secondary school, it was pretty clear that my dyslexia wasn't something I just needed a bit of extra help for. In the summer in between junior school and secondary school, I'd gone to a special school for people with learning disabilities, a summer school, hoping to improve my reading and writing. So I'd spent 4 of my 6 weeks summer holiday at school, and there hadn't been much improvement. So by the time I got into secondary school, I'll tell you something strange. I was in a top set for English, but I had to have an amanuensis sitting next to me, reading things aloud and taking my dictation. So you might wonder, why was I in a top set? I remember the teacher reading a poem aloud to the class. It was about the father who has eyes clouded with guilt, saying, "You had a rough time down there." And the son saying, "Yes. And you know, it wasn't the nails that really hurt, it was the kiss." The teacher asked the class what the poem was about, and I put up my hand and said, "It's Jesus returning to heaven after being on earth." Other people in the class laughed, but the teacher said, "Yes, you're right, that's what it's about." I also love Shakespeare. I could probably quote Macbeth, at least the abridged version, from start to finish.
When shall we 3 meet again? In thunder, lightning, or in rain?
So yes, I was in the top set for English, but I don't have an English language GCSE. I have an English literature GCSE because I was allowed to have an amanuensis for that exam. There was a reading comprehension exam, which I wasn't allowed to have an amanuensis. They actually had me attempt the mock in class on my own. And they left me for a while, and then I remember my English teacher coming back and said, "No, we're not going to put you through this. You won't be entered for the actual GCSE." Yes, all my other GCSEs I took with the aid of an amanuensis, and I left with an A, 4 Bs, a C and a D. And I went to sixth form college and got A-levels. But I needed that amanuensis in any class that required reading and writing. I had to have a TA, teaching assistant, or whatever they call them, an LA, sitting next to me, reading things aloud and taking my dictation. That's how I got through school, college, and eventually university. Passed the first year of a sociology degree, and then became ill and didn't finish, and then was mostly unemployed for many years, and finally went back and did a degree in drama, for which I needed a lot of help from the Student Support and Wellbeing Department. And they did give me all the help I asked for, but then they made me feel guilty for asking for it in the first place. Told me that I required more help than any other student, even blind students. They actually had my counsellor pass on that to me, which I think was actually a breach of ethics. It's difficult to be told that. A friend of mine pointed out later that, of course, blind students can read Braille and you can't, so is it really that surprising? Another friend afterwards said, well, maybe they should be giving the blind students more help then. I've always asked for help, I've always insisted on it. That's why I do feel irritation often when I see people, and I'm not saying it doesn't really happen, but it's the way it's always shown as people trying to hide their dyslexia, being embarrassed about speaking out. And often the message of the piece is, if you just asked for help, you'd be given it. But I ask for help all the time and I'm not always given it. And it can be very frustrating. Another time, I was supposed to go to group therapy with the NHS for panic attacks. And I spoke on the phone and said to a receptionist, if there's any reading and writing required for these classes, I won't be able to do it. I'll need somebody there to help me. They said, no, there's no reading and writing required. It's just group therapy. I said, okay, so I'm not going to walk in and have somebody hand me a form and ask me to fill it out, am I? And then find out that nobody can help me. Oh, no. I said, can you check? She was laughing and she checked and she said, no, definitely not. So, of course, you know what's coming. I turned up there, was handed a booklet and told, can you fill in the first page? I looked at it and said, no, I'm very severely dyslexic. I need help with this. They looked very confused. I said, will I not be able to do this course? Is there not somebody who could help me? No. I think I said before about not being able to get your head around the fact that I can't text is much more difficult when it comes through somebody whose job it is meant to help you. Again, when I was at university the second time, I needed to have help, people to help me study in the library, to help me find the right books. I should explain something about dyslexia. The reason we can't read and write, we don't see the words back to front. We don't see the letters back to front. We don't see the words all mixed up. Quite often in films, TV shows, this is shown as how dyslexic people see, and I think the people making the films think that they have some kind of clever visual metaphor. You would not believe how many people have asked me in real life if I actually see words jumbled up, if I see letters back to front. They don't think it's a metaphor, they think we really see that way. That's not how we see. We see the same way you do, I think. Well, depends how you see. But it's our memory. It's my memory that's the problem. I don't remember how words are supposed to look. Imagine if you opened a book and every single word on the page was a word you'd never seen before. You'd find it pretty difficult to read that book, wouldn't you? Most people who are not dyslexic, who grow up learning to read and write in their native language, who have an education, even if it's just a school education. I'm not saying it doesn't take energy, but I think when you read, you don't really have to try to read every word. Your brain does it without conscious effort. You just look at the words and you know what they say because all the decoding is happening very quickly. In fact, it's hard for you to look at words and not read them. But we don't remember words. We don't remember what they look like. Our brain finds that decoding much harder. People with severe dyslexia, when we look at words, it's as if we're seeing them for the first time. It's a memory problem. I always need help, whatever requires reading and writing. And there's so many more things these days. People expect you to fill things in online instead of calling receptionists. People expect you to apply for doctor's appointments online and all sorts of things. But Getting back on track, I had a amanuensis the second time I was at university, somebody who was supposed to help me write my essays. And you would think it's a pretty important job. They should employ people full-time, pay them well, but instead they decided to get a load of temps in and pay them minimum wage to do the job. One of these people simply couldn't get her head around the fact I couldn't do text messages. I remember explaining it to her several times that she can't send me text messages, she has to call. I remember explaining at length for the 5th time, and then we did some work together, and then as I was leaving the building I got a text message. I tried to read it but I couldn't, so I called, and it was her. She'd sent me another text message. People just can't get their heads around it. And that's difficult enough when it's just an ordinary person, but somebody who's actually meant to be helping you, it makes it very difficult. The university gave me all the help I asked for, but they made me feel guilty for asking for it in the first place. And my mental health suffered. I had a panic attack in front of the wrong person one day. It was the person who was supposed to manage my case, to assign people to help me, who once said to me, "You're not dyslexic, you have to stop saying that because we had you assessed. And it didn't say you were dyslexic, it said you had a specific learning disability." Which is a bit like telling somebody, "No, you don't have a Dalmatian. You've got to stop saying you have a Dalmatian because I saw on the form that you have a dog." Disability support advisor to a dyslexic student and doesn't know that dyslexia is a specific learning disability. At that time, well, I was virtually threatened with being kicked out of the university because I was too much trouble to help, what with my dyslexia and my mental health issues. And it made me feel pretty terrible. When I'd been on job seekers allowance, I'd often felt very guilty for just taking and not producing, not working. But sometimes I would get jobs. I did work at a cleaning job for 4 years, and normally I could do fine, but sometimes I was assigned to cover somebody else's work, and I was often criticised for not working fast enough. It's not just words, it's other simple tasks. I have great difficulty memorising simple tasks and doing them automatically. So I've done factory work and cleaning work, and sometimes it goes okay and sometimes I can do it, and other times I'm told I can't do it, it's not good enough. I'm told you don't work fast enough and it's not fair on everybody else. And now at the uni I was being told that I was asking for more help than any other disabled student. And it was very difficult because being unemployed, I felt like I was just taking, and being in jobs, I'm told it's not fair on my colleagues to have to work for me. And now I'm being told that my being at the uni isn't fair on other students, other disabled students. I'm taking too many resources. I remember feeling at the time that the most moral thing that I could do was disappear. Jump off a cliff. I talked to my best friend about this, and she said to me, "But you wouldn't feel that way about any other disabled person." And that was incredibly helpful. It was at that time I realised that was internalised ableism. Me feeling like I didn't fit in, that I was just broken, that I was a crap person, a drain on resources, was internalised ableism. And I'd always been so confident about asking for help with my dyslexia. And then when that help wasn't provided, I felt like it was my fault. I felt like there was something wrong with me. But she was right. I wouldn't feel that way about any other disabled person. I got through the degree eventually. I have a degree. I've got software on the computer that can help me now as well. I've got software where you scan things in and it reads it out loud to you, or you highlight what's on the screen and it reads it out loud to you. Unfortunately, it doesn't work with every single website, so I still need a lot of help with some of them. And when I go for my COVID jab, I have to take my partner with me so that he can fill in the form for me. I can just about write my name, maybe a few other words, but if I tried to fill the whole form in myself, I'd make mistakes. I want you to know that if you're somebody who has very severe dyslexia and you've been told that you can overcome it and you haven't managed to, it's not your fault. Some people have more severe dyslexia than others. And sometimes, no matter how hard you work, you can't overcome it and you can't learn to read and write like a normal person. I can't watch a subtitled movie. If I want to read a novel, I have to get an audio version, a book on tape. I've got a computer that can read things out to me off the internet. I've got another where I can talk and it types. Of course, then it's quite hard if it gets words wrong to go and correct them yourself, or to go through and adjust the punctuation and the spelling. Sometimes I could still use an amanuensis to help me proofread things I've written. If you have these problems, you're not alone and it's not your fault. I love audiobooks. I love them so much. When I was a kid, they were on cassette tape. As I got older, they were on CD, and now you can find them on the internet. I was once on a train with a friend of a friend, and I was telling him about how much I loved audiobooks. And he said, and how I'd read them from a young age, listened to them from a young age, and how much I loved them, and how it was probably why I had a broad vocabulary and seemed educated to people. And he said, but don't you think that your parents should have taken them away from you and said you weren't allowed to listen to audiobooks anymore and forced you to learn to read and write? What do you think would have happened if your parents had done that? Well, the first thought that came into my head was that I would have died. And I didn't say that out loud because I thought it was too dramatic. I said I'm sure I would have suffered from mental health issues a lot earlier than I actually did. It shocked me that somebody could say that. But I feel there's always this drive to make people who don't work the same way everyone else does, work the same way everyone else does. But we don't all work the same way. Some of us are different. And that's okay. And if you have a learning disability or any kind of disability or health condition that makes you feel like the world isn't designed for you, is not your fault. It's the world's fault. If you want to see more videos by me, consider supporting me on Patreon, Bobbie Cranney.